The crew had been preparing for this day for weeks. Captain Derek Reeves stood at the front of the ship's conference room, watching as his crew made the final touches to the setup. Tables were arranged meticulously, the lights dimmed just enough to look sophisticated but not too formal, and the holographic flags of their respective nations were displayed proudly. Everything had to be perfect for the Paxil ambassador's arrival. The Paxil were known for their intellectual prowess, their sharpness in negotiations, and their near-perfect diplomatic skills. Humans had been eager to establish peaceful relations with them, especially with their advanced technology, which could potentially benefit humanity in countless ways. The Paxil, however, were notoriously hard to impress. Captain Reeves had no illusions about how this dinner was going to go. "Captain, we need a contingency plan," Lieutenant Jane suggested, adjusting her uniform nervously. "What if they don't like the food? Or what if they don't understand the etiquette?" Reeves let out a small laugh, trying to hide his own nerves. "Don't worry, Jane. Paxil don't eat like we do. Their concept of food is more like energy absorption. As long as we don't offer them a steak, we should be fine." Jane raised an eyebrow. "A steak? Just trust me," Reeves replied, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're not serving meat. No one will accidentally offer them something they can't consume." The crew continued bustling around, finalizing arrangements. A soft chime echoed in the hallway, signaling the arrival of the Paxil. Everyone straightened, assuming their best professional poses, ready to make the perfect impression. When Zolara, the Paxil ambassador, entered, the entire atmosphere shifted. She was taller than any human, with long, smooth silver skin that shimmered faintly under the lights. Her eyes were wide and calm, yet somehow intense. She didn't look like she had the same emotional expressiveness humans had. She carried herself with an almost mechanical precision. "Captain Reeves," Zolara said, her voice calm but penetrating, as though every word was measured for maximum efficiency. "I heard much about your species. I am pleased to finally observe your culture firsthand." Reeves gave a welcoming nod. "It's our honor, Ambassador. We've prepared everything to ensure you have a pleasant evening." As they moved to their seats at the table, Zolara's gaze flicked around, scanning the room with interest. Her curiosity was clear, but she wasn't overt about it. She was processing every little detail in her quiet, methodical way. The conversation started normally enough. Pleasantries were exchanged. The humans were overly polite, perhaps overly eager to impress. Zolara was a master of the diplomatic game, offering little, analyzing everything. But then she paused, her sharp gaze turning toward Captain Reeves, her lips barely curling into what could be called a smile. "So, Captain," she began, her voice cutting through the air with a kind of calm authority, "which one of you is the father?" The room fell silent. A few crew members exchanged uncomfortable glances, their faces flushing slightly. Reeves blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "I beg your pardon." Zolara's eyes didn't waver. "I mean, which one of you is the father of your offsprings?" Her words were as blunt as a laser, her tone matter-of-fact. Reeves froze, his mind racing as he tried to process the question. He glanced around, expecting someone to laugh, or at least make light of the situation. But the crew was too stunned to respond. A few exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether this was some sort of cultural misunderstanding or something else entirely. Reeves stammered, looking for some way to redirect the conversation. "I don't have any children, actually." Zolara seemed unfazed. So you do not reproduce as a collective?" She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to fathom the intricacies of human biology. No, it's not that." Reeves rushed to explain, his face growing red. "Humans, we have families, and, well, reproduction is a little more personal. You know, individuals have children, not shared." Zolara's expression remained unchanged. "Fascinating," she said, nodding slowly. "So, you do not practice genetic redistributions?" Reeves ran a hand through his hair. "No, we don't," he said, trying to recover his composure. "Humans have partners, families, and children. It's different from what you might be familiar with." She processed the words, her gaze moving to Lieutenant Jane as she spoke next. "And you?" she asked. "Are you the mother?" Jane nearly choked on her drink, her eyes widening in surprise. "No, No, I'm not. She cut herself off, clearly flustered by the confusion. I mean, I don't have kids. Zolara continued, undeterred. So, there is no genetic collaboration between humans? You select specific partners. Reeves sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Exactly. It's a process. There's consent involved, and consent, Zolara interrupted, the word clicking in her mind like a piece of a puzzle. Yes, I understand. So, you must be choosing partners based on some emotion, some attachment. Reeves looked at her, half amused, half exasperated. Well, yeah, emotional attachment is kind of a big deal for humans. Zolara processed this, but her gaze grew more intense. I see, she said, her voice suddenly tinged with something that almost resembled curiosity. That seems inefficient. The comment landed with the weight of 1,000 confused glances. The crew tried to stifle their laughter, but it was clear they were uncomfortable. Zolara, for all her intellectual might, was still struggling with human complexities. She continued in her matter-of-fact way. So, there's no shared genetic pool. You do not simply select any suitable genetic material. She looked around, her expression neutral. This seems unnecessarily complex. Why not share genetic resources freely? Does it not waste time to select one individual? The confusion was palpable. No one knew how to respond. Finally, Lieutenant Jane, clearly trying to break the tension, attempted to clarify further. Well, human reproduction isn't about just having kids. It's about connection, love, relationships. She paused. It's personal. Zolara tilted her head again, still processing. Love? That's another concept I don't fully understand. Reeves leaned forward, trying to maintain a bit of control over the conversation. Well, I guess humans are messy like that. We form attachments, get emotional, make things complicated. It's part of our nature. Zolara didn't seem offended, just confused. I'm not sure I see the advantage. It sounds inefficient. She leaned back, analyzing Reeves in a way that felt too clinical for comfort. But perhaps that is the strength of your species. Your unpredictability. The words hung in the air for a moment, as Zolara turned her attention back to the table, her mind working through human customs. The crew let out a collective, uncomfortable sigh, grateful the conversation had finally shifted. At least, for the moment, Zolara's questions didn't stop there. After the initial shock had passed, the crew quickly realized that trying to explain human relationships to an alien diplomat with absolutely no concept of emotional nuance was a dangerous game. As dinner proceeded, it became clear that Zolara wasn't just curious, she was determined to understand. And in her quest for understanding, no cultural barrier was too delicate to cross. So, Zolara said, looking directly at Lieutenant Jane, who was fidgeting with her napkin, "How do you choose your mate?" The table froze. Jane's face went red as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She was more than just a little taken aback. Well, it's not really something I mean, do you just select someone with compatible genetics? Or is it more about their strength, their intelligence? Zolara continued, seemingly oblivious to Jane's discomfort. I've heard human females prefer those with superior traits. Or do you choose based on something else? Are your decisions influenced by physical attraction, perhaps? Or is it strictly logical? Jane opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her mind was spinning. This was far beyond the realm of casual dinner talk. She glanced at Captain Reeves, hoping for a rescue. Reeves cleared his throat. It's a little more complex than that, Zolara, he said, clearly struggling to find the right words. Humans, well, we tend to look for emotional connection. It's not about physical traits or genetics alone. We form bonds. Attachment. Zolara tilted her head, clearly intrigued, but also unfazed. Attachment. Fascinating. She didn't even try to hide her curiosity now. So, you select your partner based on feelings. She practically spat the word out. That seems inefficient. You could simply choose the one with the best traits for your survival, not based on feelings. Reeves tried to hold it together, But this was like trying to explain a concept that was totally foreign to a species that had never experienced it. It's not about survival, Zolara. It's about connection, emotional intimacy. We, humans, need that to feel complete. We're not just concerned with survival, we want to be understood. Zolara processed this information, her expression unchanged. But emotions are volatile. They can change. If you build your system around something that can fluctuate so easily, how do you trust it? Captain Reeves felt the frustration bubbling up. He was clearly on the defensive now, but he was determined to keep things professional. Well, that's what makes us human, Zolara. We don't just operate on logic. Emotions are part of what makes us *alive star. They give us depth. Without them, we wouldn't be able to form the kind of relationships that drive our society forward. Zolara blinked slowly, as if weighing his words. She wasn't getting it, at least not in the way he'd hoped. So, you value unpredictability, she said, with a note of finality. Interesting. She then turned her attention to a new subject, which had equally perplexing implications. Tell me, Zolara continued, in your dating rituals, she said the word carefully, still not quite sure what it meant. Are there rules to how you perform the union? Or is it simply free form? Spontaneous? She asked the last word like it was a theory she was exploring for the first time. Reeves blinked. Well, you could say it's more spontaneous, sure. But there are norms, you know? Respect for boundaries, things like that. Zolara processed this in silence for a long moment before asking, and how do you communicate your desire for these unions? I assume you have signals. Reeves was starting to lose his composure now. No signals. It's more personal star. You know, we talk. We get to know each other first. Zolara's eyes narrowed, her voice steady. Ah, so you form alliances based on conversations? How inefficient. Why not simply use telepathy? It would cut down on misunderstanding. Or are your signals not sufficient for such important decisions? Telepathy? Jane squeaked from the other side of the table. What? Like reading our minds? Yes, Zolara answered, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Why else would you waste time with such lengthy conversations when the answer could be transmitted directly? At this point, the crew was stifling laughter, but the awkwardness was palpable. Jane was shaking her head in disbelief. You can't just everything. You have to, well, feel it. Build trust. Zolara stared blankly at her. Feel it. Trust. She said the words slowly, as though testing the weight of them in her mouth. But feelings aren't reliable. Reeves sighed. You're right. Feelings are messy. But they are also real. It's the mess that makes us human. And, quite honestly, it's what keeps our relationships real. It's why, for all our differences, humans can form lasting bonds. Even in the face of, well, chaos. Zolara seemed to accept this, but just as quickly as she did, she turned her attention back to another burning question. Then, she said, do you ever regret your choices? Do you feel remorse? The question hung heavy in the air. It was far too personal, but it was also another opportunity for Zolara to analyze what seemed to be a massive blind spot in human nature. Reeves rubbed his face, unsure of how to handle this. Sure, we feel regret. We make mistakes, but we also learn from them. We grow star. Zolara's expression softened, if only slightly. Growth? Another concept I'm trying to understand, she said, almost to herself. The dinner continued in strained silence, as Zolara spent the rest of the evening turning over the ideas of emotion, connection, and the complexity of human relationships in her mind. Despite the awkwardness, the crew had grown used to her blunt, uninhibited questions. Each response felt like trying to explain abstract art to someone who only understood mathematics. And as the night wore on, it became clear that despite all the misunderstanding, the real strength of humanity had come through. The Paxil might have found it illogical, emotional, and inefficient, but they couldn't deny that these messy, unpredictable bonds were part of what made humans so resilient, and, perhaps, even more powerful than they realized. Zolara, for all her intellect, had begun to see that human relationships might be strained, but they weren't weak star. And maybe, just maybe, That was something worth studying. Reeves sat back in his chair, feeling exhausted but relieved. The questions would continue, he knew, but now at least there was a small bridge between their cultures, a bridge made not of logic, but of something far more powerful. Something messy. Something human. The dinner had descended into chaos. Well, not literal chaos, but the kind of awkward, uncomfortable silence that made every person at the table second-guess their life choices. Zolara was a diplomat, but tonight she was also an emotional anthropologist, dissecting everything that made humans, well, human. Captain Reeves had barely finished explaining that feelings weren't something to be analyzed away when Zolara made another sharp observation. So, when you choose a partner, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, are you influenced by their scent asterisks? She paused, then added, you do have a scent, yes? A few seconds of dead silence passed. Reeves stared at her, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't the first time she'd brought up something odd, but this was a new low. No, he said slowly, looking to Jane for support. We don't really, well, at least not in the way you might think. We don't rely on scent. It's mostly about, communication, personality, that kind of thing. Zolara didn't seem convinced. She looked down at her plate, clearly lost in thought, before speaking again. I see. I was just curious. We, the Paxil, have a far more utilitarian view of reproduction. Scent plays a major role in determining compatibility. Jane, who was barely holding it together at this point, shot a glance at Captain Reeves. You mean like pheromones? Zolara nodded. Yes, we rely on them to gauge genetic fitness and emotional compatibility before initiating any sort of union. It's efficient. She paused, as though reflecting on the word. Not messy like, your species. The room collectively winced. The unspoken messy had become a recurring theme in the conversation, and no one knew how to handle it anymore. Well, Zolara, Reeves began, trying to reassert control over the conversation. We don't exactly pick our partners by scent. Human relationships are more complex. We consider things like emotional connections, mutual interests, and trust. It's not about efficiency. It's about feelings star. Zolara's response was almost immediate. I understand that you humans are, as you say, emotional star. But if you are so inefficient in your selection process, how do you avoid making poor decisions? Do you not experience regret? There it was again, regret star. It seemed to be a concept that Zolara couldn't get her head around. To her, regret was an anomaly, an emotion that didn't serve any practical purpose. To humans, though, it was part of the deal. Life wasn't neat and tidy, and sometimes the messiness was exactly what made it worth living. We do experience regret, Reeves said, leaning back in his chair, his voice steady now, but it's part of the process. We make mistakes, sure, but we also grow from them. The mistakes help us learn what works and what doesn't. We take those lessons with us. Zolara's eyes narrowed in thought. Growth? Yes, that's another concept I am still exploring. But why does it always involve such volatility? You make a mistake, feel regret, then grow? It seems counterproductive. Captain Reeves resisted the urge to sigh. I guess it's just part of being human. We're not all about survival or logic. We're about experience star. We want to feel. And sometimes that feeling is messy. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. But that's where the richness comes from. If everything were clean and simple, it wouldn't be worth it. Jane leaned forward now, eager to jump into the discussion. It's like, well, imagine if you didn't have that emotional connection, Zolara. What would that even look like? Just a bunch of people doing things for the sake of efficiency? That doesn't sound like a life anyone would want to live. Zolara turned her gaze to Jane, as if truly considering the question for the first time. I've never thought of it that way, she said, her voice softer now. Our society is built around function. It's practical. But perhaps there's something more to this messy human way. Your bonds, your connections, even your regrets, they make your society resilient. And that's interesting. Reeves smiled slightly, feeling the tension loosen just a bit. Maybe they weren't so far apart after all. Yeah, resilience. That's a big part of it. We've got a lot of flaws, but we learn to adapt. Zolara's expression softened further, though she didn't smile in the way humans would recognize. I'll admit, she said, I'm starting to understand why you humans place so much value on emotions. Even if I can't yet fully comprehend them, I can see their purpose. It was a breakthrough, but one that still felt delicate. There was no magic solution to bridging the gap between their cultures, but this small shift was a step forward. As the evening wore on, the conversation shifted again, and for the first time, the crew felt somewhat at ease. Zolara, it seemed, had become more comfortable with the concept of human feelings, though, clearly, she still didn't quite get it. But the earlier tension had dissolved into something a little more civil. And the human crew? They were starting to recognize the value of their own messiness too. Still, there were moments of discomfort. Zolara's directness could only be suppressed for so long. I'm curious, she said after a pause, when you date someone, how do you communicate your intent? Or is it simply understood by your body language? Captain Reeves blinked, caught off guard by the question. Well, it's a bit of both. I mean, body language can say a lot, but mostly he stopped himself, realizing how this was going to sound. It's not as clinical as you might think. We don't have a protocol for it. Humans talk. We get to know each other. It's a process. Zolara nodded thoughtfully, but there was something almost mechanical in her expression. So, it's all improvisational? Reeves chuckled nervously. Yeah, I guess you could say that. A lot of it's about figuring things out as we go along. Zolara tilted her head. Impressive. You don't have a set path? You create it as you go. It's not a perfect system, but it's ours, Reeves said, suddenly feeling a little proud despite himself. That's how humans work. We may not be efficient all the time, but we make it work. The words hung in the air for a moment. Zolara seemed to consider them, her expression unreadable. I will have to report this to my superiors. It is an inefficient system, but perhaps one worth considering. The crew exchanged glances. A little awkward, but at least Zolara wasn't looking at them like they were completely out of their minds anymore. There was a small understanding, a glimpse of mutual respect, even if the alien diplomat still couldn't quite process all the emotional nuances that made humans tick. As the evening wound down, Zolara finally let her guard down just enough to acknowledge something that no one had expected. I will say this, humans. Your messiness as you put it, is fascinating. I will report back with new insights. She offered a small nod, the closest thing to an approving gesture she'd made all night. The dinner had ended, not with the grand conclusion Reeves had hoped for, but with something more subtle, more human. And that, as it turned out, was exactly what the humans had been hoping to achieve all along. The next few days aboard the ship were filled with a strange tension, one that felt both lighter and more awkward at the same time. Zolara's visit had ended on a somewhat positive note, but the crew couldn't shake the feeling that they were being scrutinized from every angle. Zolara had stayed true to her reputation as a meticulous diplomat, and her observations on human behavior were as sharp as ever. Captain Reeves sat in his quarters, staring out at the stars through the large viewport. His mind was racing through the events of the last few days. He'd spent a significant part of his career building alliances, ensuring smooth diplomatic relations, but nothing quite like this had ever happened before. Nothing had ever required so much explaining. Still, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of accomplishment. They'd made progress, maybe not a perfect understanding, but a real one. And that mattered. There was a knock at the door. Reeves turned around to see Lieutenant Jane standing in the doorway. She didn't look any less frazzled than she had the other night. Captain, we've received another transmission from Zolara, Jane said, her voice tight with a hint of both anticipation and dread. Reeves raised an eyebrow. What now? Seems like she wants to have another discussion, Jane replied, her hands fidgeting at her sides. This time, about human mating rituals. Reeves leaned back in his chair, letting out a low groan. Great. I thought we were done with that part. Jane chuckled nervously. We thought so too. He stood up and walked over to the communication console. All right, let's see what she wants this time. The screen flickered to life, and Zolara's face appeared. This time, she seemed even more intense than before. Her gaze, as sharp as a laser, met Reeves with a kind of expectation that made him feel like he was on trial. "Captain Reeves," Zolara began, without preamble, "I've given considerable thought to our last conversation. I have many more questions about your human interactions. I would appreciate your answers, as I am still attempting to understand your species." Reeves took a deep breath. "Of course, Ambassador. We're happy to help with any further inquiries. But just so we're clear, this won't be another discussion about our ***, right?" Zolara didn't respond immediately, but the pause was long enough for Reeves to wonder if she hadn't understood the discomfort he was trying to convey. Then she spoke again, her voice calm but insistent. "No, it's not about scent. I've moved beyond that. However, I still find your human practices inefficient, and I wish to explore them more thoroughly. Specifically, your concept of commitment star." Reeves blinked. "Commitment? Yes," Zolara said, as though it were the most straightforward topic in the universe. "It seems illogical. You engage in a ritual of attachment, and then you expect it to last forever. What happens if one partner changes, or no longer serves the same function? How do you manage that imbalance?" Reeves felt his frustration mounting again, but he forced himself to stay calm. "It's not about functionality, Zolara. Commitment is about choice. We choose to stay with someone even when things get difficult. It's not about what they can do for us. It's about being with them. Through all the mess." Zolara didn't seem to follow. "So, it is an irrational choice. You commit to someone without any logical reason?" "Not irrational," Reeves said, his voice firm. "It's based on trust. Love. It's what makes us." He stopped himself, realizing how often he had used that word. He was starting to sound like a broken record. "It's what makes us human. You can't reduce human relationships to logic alone. There's an emotional bond, something you can't quantify." Zolara took a moment to absorb that, her face remaining unreadable. "I see," she said, her voice even. "So, you are willing to invest time, energy, and resources into something that cannot guarantee results? How inefficient." Reeves sighed, rubbing his temples. This wasn't how he had imagined this mission going. "I guess you could call it inefficient, but that's part of the deal. We risk getting hurt, we risk losing ourselves, but we do it anyway. Because it means something." Zolara's eyes narrowed. "That's illogical. If you risk pain and loss, what do you gain in return? Why not remove the risk? Would it not be smarter to eliminate uncertainty?" Reeves chuckled dryly. "You're really trying to make human relationships sound like a spreadsheet, aren't you?" Zolara blinked. "I don't understand the reference." "It's a joke," Reeves said, shaking his head. "Never mind." Zolara didn't catch the sarcasm. She was still mulling over the idea of human commitment. "You humans have strange priorities," she remarked after a beat. "Why do you continue to engage in such behavior if it brings no guaranteed benefit?" "Because it does bring benefit," Reeves said, the words coming more easily now. "It gives us connection. We might get hurt, but we also experience joy. It's about shared moments. It's about growing, even through the pain. I know that might not make sense to you, but it's part of what makes us whole." Zolara processed that with her usual efficiency, and after another moment of silence, she spoke again. "I am beginning to understand why you place so much importance on relationships, she said, her voice softer now, less analytical. "It seems emotionally taxing, but perhaps it is the core of your resilience." Reeves felt the tension in his chest start to ease. "Yeah, it's messy, but it's also what keeps us going." Zolara nodded. "I will report this information to my superiors. I will include it in my analysis of human emotional stability. It is interesting, even if it doesn't align with our methods." "Thanks," Reeves said, forcing a smile. "I guess that's progress." Zolara's eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second. "I will need more time to fully comprehend human connections. However, I appreciate your willingness to share your messy practices with me." Reeves chuckled. "It's been a pleasure." The communication ended abruptly, leaving Reeves staring at the blank screen for a long moment. For the first time in days, he felt like they were finally on the same page, at least to some extent. Maybe Zolara would never fully understand the beauty in human relationships, but she was starting to see the value in their imperfections. Lieutenant Jane appeared at the door again, but this time, her expression was different. She looked almost relieved. "How'd it go?" she asked, her voice a little lighter. Reeves leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms above his head. "Better than expected. She's still confused as hell, but at least she's not completely dismissing us anymore." Jane laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I'll take that as a win." Reeves smiled. "Me too." And for the first time in a while, he truly believed that despite their differences, there was something they could learn from each other. Something worth sticking around for. Even in the mess,